Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse, talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the sophomore album from Arca, titled Mutant. When I first reviewed Arca's debut album Zen last year, I went in expecting some dissonance. I was prepared for a harsh blast of abrasion and intense sounds that would push the bounds of listenability, the sort of experimental electronica that would alienate pretty much everybody except the most hardened of critics and hardcore fans. But that wasn't exactly what I got. Arca's distinctive brand of electronica went in a very different yet no less dissonant and experimental direction. Wild tempo changes, off-kilter melodies, awkward tunings, gorgeous atmosphere, and gleaming classical instrumentation contorted through strange, warping progressions. It was the sort of music that could easily be branded by a classicist as incompetent instead of transcendent, and yet somehow Arca mostly stuck the landing. Even if I did wish he could pair his bizarre melodic choices with more of a factual foundation in the beats and percussion, which weren't exactly as interesting or as good. So fast forward to, well, now, and Arca has a new record titled Mutant, which promised to be even weirder and darker, even blending in elements of industrial noise music. Now immediately, I thought this was a great idea. My favorite song off of Zen had been Bullet Chain because it managed to fuse that textured atmosphere with a clanking progression that roiled and spooled like the titular tool. And if Arca was going more in that direction, we could have something really strong, really special on our hands here. And considering I spent the majority of this year delving into more abrasive and experimental music than ever before, it's really kind of up my alley these days. I was really excited to check out Mutant. So, what do we get? Well, we sure as hell got something more abrasive and dissonant, that's for damn sure. And it's one of the reasons that Mutant's a bit of a frustrating listen for me, because the central idea is to drive that musical contrast, create songs that aren't so much complete pieces, but incomplete, shuddering, half-formed monsters, where you can see every edge and seam marring traditional beauty to reveal something unearthly and mutated beneath it. And as you would expect, it's kinda hit and miss how often this actually manages to work, to the point where I actually enjoyed this less than I enjoyed Zen, especially as Arca's formula becomes all the more clear with a longer album release, which this is. Because here's the thing, the more times I listen through this album as a whole, the more that Arca's stabs at blending moments of beauty or control with distortion or arrhythmic progressions seems to fall towards a structure and a pattern that you could almost come to predict. While there are songs where Arca draws upon classical instrumentation, most notably a rattling harpsichord tone where the jittery melodic moments feel less composed than improvised, and they are a lot less impressive than when Aphex Twin did it on Druckuse, most of this record is deeper and thicker, a cavernous mix with the synths to echo across so the buzzy fragments to splinter and fade away. The bass hits, they can get heavier, the lumbering booms of Mutant and Soshiro, the blubbery bounce of Snakes that will eventually dissolve into the lonely, airy blasts of Elts, the clicking rollick of Front Load that is probably my favorite beat on this album, but sure enough, the glassy, hollow synths will flood in either in jagged spurts if the beat is more light and actually stable, or as moody accents where the beat is more jagged and rough-edged. And while they might build to moments of clarion beauty or elegance, it's only a matter of time before everything just collapses in upon itself into the murk, the mutation finally breaking down to its inevitable demise. And what becomes more interesting is that for as alien as this record can sound, it doesn't really feel dark in a traditional sense. Sure, there are moments of howling cacophony on the title track that reminds me a bit of the internet art film We Are the Strange, in a good way I might add, it's probably my favorite song on the album, or the pitch-shifted vocal fragments of N that develops a bizarre whirling groove of Spikes, or the rattling tension of Faggot that feels all the more brittle for it. I just get no sense of menace from this album. Where an album like Jlen's dark energy took an exposed dissonance between classical touches and electronic darkness and paired it with some ruthlessly aggressive beats, Mutant never really builds any momentum. It's wobbling and sluggish, with every misshapen step feeling like it's wading through a buzzy film of binaural flies, or composed in a piano breaking mid-note. And sure, I get why Arca might want a dark atmosphere to color this album, but it's not like it reaches moments of transcendent beauty either, so much as it just falls into this awkwardly benign gray zone. And that kind of gets frustrating because when the melodies do build some momentum, like on Alive, or the midpoint of the title track, or that mournful build to iciness on Extend, you realize that Arca could easily drive the dramatic contrast that he was looking for with a hint more restraint and actually make it work. I don't mind the awkward shifts in tempo or melodic dissonance or stuttering beats, but again, without a more firmly established foundation, feels like we're getting fragments of tracks instead of fully formed pieces. That's where we get to points that just feel half-finished like before, like the extremely underwhelming closer Peonies, all just a wallow and muddy, dissonant gurgle that never evolves out of it. or the meandering harpsichord of gratitude that starts off promising. It does get a little bit darker and deeper for the midpoint, but feels like more of an improvised practice session than an actual psalm. And yeah, I get this album is more of a soundscape, but still, all those fragments need to add up to something. And this ties into the awkward question underscoring this album. What it might be trying to say, if anything. Because let's face it, this album's primary appeal is in those contrasting sounds, the warped, shuddering mutations between beauty and ugliness. But without a real defined progression from track to track, even despite some tracks flowing into each other reasonably well, there are some jarring tonal shifts, particularly in the back half of this album. There isn't really an arc or momentum to define these mutations beyond vague emotions. And while there are a few sparse moments of wonder and awe that I can't appreciate, most of it boils down to unease and discomfort, less outright revolting or messy than just misshapen and alien. You can appreciate the oddity for a short time, but beyond that, there's little real desire for me to return. There's not a lot that really draws me to this. And once you start picking out the patterns and melodic composition and realize that Arca doesn't really have much in his toolset that will actually bite with a real edge or hit transcendent melodic climax points, it's difficult to pull out more. In other words, as much as I wanted to like this album, they eventually started running together and feeling kind of formulous and a little bit formulaic to me. In short, what Arca delivers with Mutant feels very much like an extension of Zen rather than building on it to something new. Longer, heavier, a little bit more abrasive in order to drive forward those contrasting moments, and yet the problems are more glaring than ever. While there is an overall cohesion in the production that I can respect, the album blurs into indistinctive, jagged blobs of sound with only a few points that actually glitter. And even despite the greater extremes in sound, there were fewer points where we get real payoff, and I can't help but feel kind of disappointed with that. For me, it's a solid 6 out of 10 and a slightly reserved recommendation. Again, like Zen, you won't hear much else like it these days, but I'm less convinced than ever that that's actually a good thing. At least this time around. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I would be more than happy to give them a listen. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.